Buenos días.
Buenos días.
I'm going to talk a little bit about
Voy a hablar un poco sobre lo que hemos estado haciendo. Hemos estado trasladando los programas MST a varios contextos comunitarios. Llevamos unos 17 años aproximadamente. Y aprendes de los errores que cometes. Hemos tenido muchos fracasos. Comprobamos que muchos de los esfuerzos llevados a cabo para trasladar nuestra experiencia a otros lugares ha tenido problemas, hemos aprendido como consecuencia de esos problemas y hemos modificado y hemos cambiado nuestras estrategias en función de eso. Pero antes de pasar a la presentación, me gustaría recalcar algo que ha dicho David. Y es que la comunidad, o el Estado, o la ciudad, o el estamento que sea, o la nación que adopte un programa MST, bueno, tiene que existir una necesidad en primera instancia. Si a la comunidad le gusta el programa de justicia juvenil, si no hay ninguna necesidad, no hay por qué montar un programa MST, sino que tiene una finalidad muy concreta, un nicho muy concreto. Así que lo que hemos comprobado es que el mejor encaje para un programa MST tiene que ver con aquellos sitios que quieren conseguir mejores resultados para los delincuentes juveniles.
About 12 years ago, Norway was a wealthy country. They didn't need cost savings. Their entire issue was getting better outcomes for children with conduct disorder and who committed criminal activity. In the U.S., most of the time when we have been brought in, it has been because of a financial crisis, a state where they reviewed the justice budget and they said we're spending, $2 million on these offenders. What are we getting out of it? Recidivism rates are high, the costs are high, there's got to be a better way. They do a research search, they look at Steve's work and they identify some possibilities, they talk to us and we discuss options. And so there needs to be a need, but I think to make the program successful, and I think Kate hit the nail on the head in a bunch of different ways, and David as well, is that you need a champion. There needs to be a champion within the organization or the context that's being in the program. And it sounds like Kate was the champion in England. And the champion is someone, they don't have to be the boss, but they have to have respect, they have to have influence, and they take the project and they are the driving force in making sure that there's the financial support that's needed, in helping to find or helping to craft proposals that recruit provider organizations, and usually the kind of provider organizations that sign on are those that are innovative, they are early adopters of innovation, they have generally far-sighted CEOs, directors. Contractual arrangements are very, very important, and the contracts specify who's the client, adherence to the quality assurance protocol, the emphasis on fidelity, the emphasis on outcome. And so, as time has evolved over those past 17 years, I think the type of arrangement that has been the most effective for us, and that I guess we started about 10 years ago, has been the development of what we call network partner organizations. Now, what a network partner organization is, it's a purveyor organization. A purveyor is an organization that's pulling out an innovation, that's carrying out and bringing an innovation out into the
está llevando la innovación hasta la comunidad.
Network partners of purveyor organizations trained by MST Services. MST Services is a home training organization to carry out all aspects of program development. So they help develop programs in the community. They help the provider organizations implement the programs, and they provide ongoing training, quality assurance, and monitoring. So currently we have 22 network partners worldwide, and these network partners actually provide the training on ongoing quality assurance to 70% of the 20,000 youth annually and families who receive MST services. So the network partners are really the critical players in the transport of MST programs. Now, these are the these are the international. Of these 22, 17 are in the U.S., and these 5 are international. So they're in Denmark, Norway, Netherlands, Sweden, and Australia. So these organizations work with MST Services. MST Services has trained them to do all the program development, all the training, all the quality assurance, but they maintain a relationship with MST Services, and there is a continual tracking of program fidelity data and outcome data. And the network partner tracks the fidelity and the outcome data of the MST teams in their locale. So if there is a problem, so for example, we have had a couple network partners that very much kind of strayed from what they should have been doing and got off track and weren't really delivering MST. They were doing something else. And it's the role of MST Service then to either kind of help them come back to providing MST with fidelity, or to work some other kind of arrangement so whatever they are doing isn't called MST anymore, it's called something else. So there's this ongoing feedback loop and collaboration. Now, the network partners they have various forms. Some of the network partners are funded by the government, by the state. So in Connecticut, for example, I'm not doing this in order. I guess I've got the one in the middle there. Some are funded by the state. Connecticut's a good example. Norway is a good example. Some are just very large provider organizations. So there may be a provider organization that has 30 MST teams, and they have their own network partnerships. So what that means is they may have 3 or 4 or 5, either advanced master's level, or doctoral level professionals who do all the training, do all the program development, and all the consultation for those groups. In other cases, in Colorado, for example, the network partner doesn't provide the actual services. What they do is they provide the training to various teams in different states across the Southwest. So this has been a very, very effective model for us. We get together on a regular basis, on an annual basis, with our network partners and have conferences and kind of discuss the latest advances and learning, and a lot of mutual collaboration. Now, the second issue, another issue that I've been asked to talk about is the adaptation. Right? Now, we make a distinction between accommodation and adaptation. And for us, adaptation is a substantial change. It's a large change in the model. And accommodation on top there is a minor change to support local flexibility. So let me go back to the adaptation. Or actually, let me stick with the accommodation for a second. So adaptations are large changes, accommodations are small changes. Some examples of accommodations that we make. Now, the accommodations are going to be through network partners often. They're going to be through the local community sites. Examples of accommodations that we have done that have worked out okay.
Ejemplos que han
It's
funcionado
changing
bien,
the year
por
of
ejemplo,
eligibility for the
el
youth.
cambio de año de
Our
elegibilidad
typical
del
eligibility is
joven,
13
hablamos
to
de
17,
13 a
but some
17,
sites do
pero
12 to
eso,
17,
algunos van
others
de
do
12 a
13
17,
to
otros
18.
hacen de
That has
13
worked
a
out okay.
18, eso ha
In
funcionado
some
bien.
cases,
En
we've
algunos
changed
casos
the degree of
hemos
seriousness
cambiado
of
el
the
nivel
degree of antisocial
de
behavior
gravedad
for the
de
eligibility
conducta
criteria.
antisocial para
We
los
have
criterios de
general
elegibilidad.
criteria very
Tenemos
high.
unos
Some sites
criterios
wanted it to
generales
be
que
a
son
little
muy
lower.
elevados, algunos
We've
querían bajar
accommodated
ese
that, and
nivel,
that's worked out
lo hemos
okay.
acomodado y ha funcionado también.
In other sites,
Mientras
we've
que
made
en otros sitios
accommodations to
hemos
judges. In
realizado
the U.S., judges are
acomodaciones
very
para los
powerful
jueces. Los
and
jueces
can
tienen mucho
decide
poder en mi
just
país
about everything
y
that
pueden
happens to the
decidir
youth.
sobre todo lo que les
And
pase
so
a los
judges are
jóvenes.
then in a position
Entonces los
to
jueces
undermine
pueden
the
socavar
best treatment model, or they're in
el
a
mejor
position to
modelo
support
de
the best
tratamiento
treatment
o
model.
bien pueden dar su apoyo al mejor
And we have
modelo de
accommodated to
tratamiento.
judges
Y hemos hecho una
in
acomodación
ways
con
that have
los
been very
jueces
unproductive
de
and that we
maneras
don't do
que no han
anymore.
sido
So,
productivas
for
y que
example, in
hemos
the
abandonado.
U.S.,
Por
it's very
ejemplo,
common
en
for
Estados
judges
Unidos,
to order
los jueces
adolescents who have substance abuse problems, to order them to group therapy
ordenar o suelen
several
pedir
times a
terapia de
week
grupo para los que
for several
consumen
hours a day.
sustancias ilegales
That
durante
is
varias horas a la semana.
antithetical, that is
Eso es
against all MST
va
policy.
contra toda la
MST
política
policy
de
is
MST.
to not
La
have
política de
youth
MST
in
consiste
groups with
en
other
que los
antisocial
jóvenes no
peers,
vayan
even if it's a
a
therapeutic group,
grupos donde hay
to
otros
have them
jóvenes
spending
con
their
conductas
time
antisociales,
after
aunque sea
school
un
and
grupo
trying to engage
terapéutico,
in pro-social peer
para
activities,
intentar
not group
meterles en
therapies.
actividades prosociales. No,
And
no
so
queremos terapias de grupo, solamente queremos
that's an
actividades
issue that now,
prosociales.
for
Pero este es
example,
un tema
I do drug court work, I
bueno,
do a lot
yo
of juvenile drug
hago
court work,
mucho trabajo
and
con
so we
los
work with
tribunales,
a lot
con
of
casos
judges
de drogodependencias,
nationwide.
así que trabajamos con muchos jueces
And
a lo largo y
if
ancho
there's a
del
MST
país.
program in
Y
a
si
site
hay un
where there's a
programa
juvenile drug
MST
court, where the
donde hay
drug
un
court
tribunal
requires
dedicado a este tipo de
that
casos
they
y
participate in
donde
these
el
group
tribunal
therapies,
exige que
we
vayan a
do
estas
not
terapias de grupo,
cooperate.
nosotros
We
no
cannot have our youth
colaboramos.
in
No
that type of
podemos
program because it
admitir que
works
nuestros
against
jóvenes
MST
acaben en este tipo
outcomes.
de
So that's
programas.
an
Esto
accommodation
funciona
that is
en
not working.
contra de MST.
We have in the U.S. the number of hours
En
worked
Estados
by the
Unidos,
therapists
el número de
tend to
horas
be a
que
bit higher
trabajan los
than
terapeutas
in many of our
suelen
sites
ser
in
algo
Europe.
superiores que en muchos
And
otros
so to
sitios
accommodate that
de Europa.
change,
Entonces, para hacer la acomodación a ese
caseload, the
cambio,
therapist caseload has
hay
been
una carga
reduced
de
in
trabajo de los
European
terapeutas
sites.
que se ha reducido en los
We have
centros o sitios
we've tried
europeos.
accommodations by including
Hemos intentado
supportive personnel
también
in the MST
incluir
teams, and
personal
they
de
have
apoyo
just gotten in
en
the
los
way
equipos de
of
MST
fidelity. They have
y
led to more
han
problems
interferido
than they have been
con la
helped.
fidelidad del
And so
programa
we
y han
don't
producido más
do that
problemas que otra
anymore. That
cosa,
was an
así que es
accommodation
una
that wasn't
fórmula que hemos
successful.
abandonado, fue una acomodación que no tuvo
Lengthening
éxito.
the treatment, our average
El
duration of
alargamiento
treatment is
de
4
la
months.
duración media
There
del
was a site in
tratamiento,
New
4
York
meses.
that had a
Hubo un
reason,
sitio
had a
en
political
Nueva
reason.
York
They
que tenía una
wanted
razón
to
política,
lengthen the treatment to
querían
9 months.
alargar el
We
tratamiento
tried it.
hasta los 9 meses, lo
It was
intentamos,
a pain.
fue
It did
un
not
dolor
work. It
de muelas,
interfered
no
with the
funcionó,
fidelity of the program
interfirió
and the
con la
outcomes.
fidelidad del
And so
programa
we
y los
don't
resultados,
do that anymore.
así
We
que
have
ya
a
no lo
clear,
hacemos.
limited duration of
Tenemos
treatment
una
that's
duración
allowed.
clara del tratamiento que
Training in
se
QA,
permite,
we have
formación
clear
en
protocols,
aseguramiento de
and we
calidad,
allow
tenemos
some
protocolos muy
flexibility in
claros
those
y
protocols, but
permitimos
not
algo de
unlimited
flexibilidad
flexibility.
en estos protocolos, pero
The
no una
timing of the
flexibilidad sin
orientation
límites.
and training,
El
there have been
timing de la
places
orientación y la
where,
formación en sitios
because of hiring
donde,
patterns, there's
debido
large,
a
in public
los
sector
patrones de
mental
contratación,
health in the U.S. is a
en
very
el sector
large
público de la
turnover
salud mental
of
hay una
staff.
rotación
And
muy
so,
grande de personal.
we don't allow a
Así que
long delay
no
in the hiring
permitimos
process,
que haya
because we've
una
had
demora
experiences where a
importante
therapist
en el
would get
proceso de
hired
contratación,
and then they
puesto
wouldn't get
que
their
se
training in 4
contrataba
months,
al
and
terapeuta
all
y
sorts
no
of
se
bad
les daba
habits
formación en 4 meses,
would evolve in training
lo
that
cual
therapist, and then
desarrollaba
it would
ya
become
hábitos
harder for them
negativos
to
y
adhere to the
resultaba mucho más
fidelity.
difícil poder
And so,
ceñirse al concepto de la fidelidad del
The
programa.
decisions about accommodations are really made
decisiones sobre las
jointly,
acomodaciones se
right? They're
toman
made jointly
conjuntamente,
between either
se toman
MST
conjuntamente
Services, if
por
they're
los
developing the
servicios de
program,
MST, si están
or
desarrollando el
between
programa,
the
o
network
bien
partner
con
in the
los socios
organization.
o el
And so
socio
there's
de la
in the
red.
entire development process, there's
Entonces,
a
en el
dialogue
proceso de
that goes
desarrollo
back
se da
and
un diálogo
forth, and
que
one
se
says,
produce
we would like to
continuamente
do
y
this,
uno
what do
dice,
you
mira,
think?
nos gustaría hacer esto, ¿qué te
it's
parece?
discussed and there are, kind of
hay
collaborative
debates
decisions
y digamos
that
que
are
las
made.
decisiones son de
But
tipo
there are
colaborativo.
a number of
Pero
issues
hay una serie de
that
cuestiones
aren't changed,
sí que
and that would lead to, or if they were changed,
cambiado,
that would lead to
o que no han cambiado, pero si se modificaran,
an adaptation,
se
and that's a
modificaran,
very
produciría una
substantial change.
adaptación, y eso ya
And
es un cambio de
adaptations are
envergadura.
treated very
Y las
differently
adaptaciones
in the
reciben un
MST
tratamiento
model than
muy
are
diferente del
accommodations.
modelo MST
So an
en comparación con
adaptation,
las acomodaciones.
as we
Las
talked about, as I
adaptaciones,
mentioned
tal y
yesterday,
como dije
MST
ayer,
is really best validated
MST se
for
valida
your chronic
infinitamente
serious
mejor
juvenile
para
offenders.
los
An
delincuentes
adaptation
juveniles
would be
crónicos.
one where it says,
Y
well, we
la
would like to
adaptación,
do is now
la
serve
adaptación, diríamos, lo
youth
que
with
queremos
serious
hacer ahora
emotional disturbance,
es, en el
or
caso del-
maltreating
queremos atender a un
families,
joven
or
con
chronic health care
importantes
conditions.
perturbaciones
That's an
emocionales, o no
adaptation.
sé, eso sería una
And as I'll
adaptación.
talk about shortly,
Y
they're
luego,
treated
lo diré,
differently, and
pero
they now, I
reciben un
think,
tratamiento
require some
diferente y
validation,
requieren
as
algo
we'll see.
de
An
validación,
adaptation
como
may also
veremos,
be in
y
the
la
model of
adaptación
service
también
delivery.
puede aplicarse
The
al modelo
typical
de servicios,
caseload
que
in
es
MST
empezar
is 4 to 6
una
clients.
carga
If
típica
you
en
double the
MST de 4 a
caseload,
6 clientes, si
you could
duplicaras
serve
esa carga de
twice as many
trabajo,
people,
puedes
and the
atender al
price
doble
per
de
client would be
personas,
half. It would be cut in
precio por
half,
cliente
which
se
would really help the
dividiría por la
cost-benefit
mitad,
analysis,
lo cual
right?
serviría
Because you'd have twice as
de
many
ayuda
clients,
para
right?
el análisis
But what would
coste-beneficio.
that do to outcomes?
Pero ¿qué es lo que
You don't know.
haría
That would be a
respecto
very
a
major
resultados? No
adaptation. We
sabe,
haven't
sería
done
una
that,
adaptación muy importante,
but that would be a
cosa que no
large
hemos hecho,
adaptation that would
pero
have to be
sería una
evaluated.
adaptación grande que habría que evaluar.
Characteristics of the therapist.
Las
It would be
características
less
del terapeuta
expensive
sería
if you use
menos caro
paraprofessionals,
si
or if you use
recurrieses a
just bachelor's level
paraprofesionales
therapists instead of master's level.
o a
All right,
terapeutas
but that's a
no de nivel de
that's a
máster.
pretty major
Pero
change.
este es un
In the
cambio
model, would
bastante
you still get the
importante.
outcomes
Y en el modelo,
if you did
¿conseguirías
that?
los resultados iguales si lo hicieras de esa
Training
manera?
and quality assurance protocols.
La
Back in
formación en
97,
protocolos de
I
aseguramiento
did
de
a
calidad.
randomized
En
trial with
97
a
hice un
two-site
estudio de
community-based
diseño
trial with
experimental
violent and chronic
con
offenders where we pulled out the
delincuentes
consultant.
crónicos y violentos,
We
agresivos.
just had the MST team and the
Teníamos al
supervisor,
equipo
and the
MST
MST
junto
expert
con el
consultant
supervisor
was
y el
out of the equation.
consultor.
And
También
what
se
we
incorporó
found
a
is
la
that
ecuación,
the
y lo que
recidivism rates
comprobamos
weren't
es
as
que las
strong
tasas de
as when the
recidivas no
consultant
eran tan
was
fuertes
involved.
como cuando participaba
Decreased, and
el
it was an
consultor.
issue of treatment
Y
fidelity.
era un tema
The
de
therapist
fidelidad
adherence
al
to the treatment
tratamiento.
model went down,
O
and the
bajaron
outcomes
los
went
niveles de
down.
adherencia y también empeoraron los
So,
resultados
as
cuando estaba
a
el consultor.
consequence, and
Y como
we
consecuencia de
get
ello,
really quite a few requests
digamos que
to,
recibimos bastantes
folks will
peticiones
say, well,
de
how
gente que
can
dice,
we
bueno,
adapt
¿de
MST
qué manera
to
podemos
treat
adaptar el MST
PTSD?
para
What
tratar
about treating
PTSD?
0
¿Qué
to
os
6,
parece tratar, no sé,
kindergartners
de
who are
0 a
getting
6
thrown out
años
of Head Start
de
programs?
los niños en preescolar a los que les expulsan
How can we
de los
adapt it to
centros?
other very
¿Cómo lo
challenging
podemos
clinical
adaptar a
populations?
otras poblaciones
And
clínicas que
what
plantean
we've done and
retos
how we
muy
respond to
importantes?
that
Y
is,
lo que hemos hecho a modo
is
de
we follow a
respuesta,
protocol that's very
hemos
similar to that
aplicado un
used by
protocolo
the
que es muy
National
parecido
Institute on
al que
Drug
utiliza
Abuse
el
for
Instituto
treatment
Nacional de
development,
Drogodependencias
and that
para
is there is a
el
multi-step
tratamiento, y
process
es un proceso de
where
múltiples
if
pasos.
there is going to be an adaptation,
Si
the
va a haber
first thing
una
that has to
adaptación, lo
happen
primero que
is there
tiene que
needs to
suceder
be
es que
a pilot
tiene
study
que haber un
that
estudio
examines,
piloto
which is
que
a small
examine,
research study
bueno, que sea un
that
pequeño
examines
estudio
the
de
feasibility
investigación
of
que
that
examine
adaptation.
la
So you
viabilidad
have
de
to
esa
change your treatment
adaptación.
manuals,
Entonces
you've
tienes
got to
que tratar
revise
los
the
manuales
treatment
de
manuals
tratamiento, tienes que
to
revisarlos
integrate the new treatment
para
protocols.
integrar los
And
nuevos
that means then
protocolos
you
de
have to
tratamiento, y
change
esto
the
significa que
supervisory
tienes que
manuals,
cambiar también
you
los
have to
manuales de
change the
supervisión,
consultation
además
manuals,
de los
you have
manuales
to
sobre
change the
consulta,
training protocol.
sobre
You often have to
protocolos de
change to some
información, y a
extent
menudo,
the adherence
en
measures.
cierta medida tienes que cambiar
And then
las
you,
medidas
in
de
a
adherencia.
pilot study,
Y en
you
un estudio
implement this
piloto
work,
se
and you see if it looks
implanta
feasible.
este
Does
trabajo y
it
se puede ver
seem
si
like
es
it's
viable
working?
o no.
You're getting reasonable outcomes.
Puedes ver
Maybe
si se
it's a
obtienen
controlled pilot
resultados
study, maybe it's
viables
just
o no.
pre-post,
Quizás sea
but it's
un
really a feasibility
control
study,
piloto,
and that
bueno,
can
pero es un
take.
estudio de
We've
viabilidad
had
realmente.
a number of those. Most of them have
Y hemos
been
tenido
funded
alguno
by
que otro,
our
la
National
mayoría
Institutes of
de ellos
Health,
han
but they
sido
don't have to be. They can
financiados
be
por los
funded.
institutos
Some have been funded by Annie
nacionales de
Casey
sanidad, pero no tiene por
Foundation.
qué ser así. Puede
Next is really an
tener
efficacy
que-
trial, and that is, okay, we have good preliminary
el
data.
estudio de
Let's do a randomized
eficacia,
trial
un ensayo de
under the
eficacia.
best of
Y
circumstances.
decimos, vamos a hacer un
With
estudio
really good
de
therapists,
diseño
really good
experimental bajo las
supervisors,
mejores circunstancias, con buenos
and it's
terapeutas,
usually led by the
buenos
folks who have
supervisores, y
led the
suele
adaptation.
ser
For example,
supervisado por
Cindy
la gente
Swenson
encargada de
for
la
the MST
adaptación.
adaptation
Sydney
for
Swenson,
maltreatment.
por ejemplo.
Let's look at the results
Pero
of those
vamos a ver
trials,
los
see how they go.
resultados de esos ensayos ensayos para ver cómo han
And
evolucionado.
if they seem
Y si
successful, we'll go
parece
to the
ser
next
que
step
tienen
and
éxito,
do more of a
pasamos a
real-world
la siguiente fase,
trial. which is an effectiveness trial, which is a study that's conducted in a real-world setting, real mental health setting, real-world practitioners. It's not ideal. There's organizational issues to deal with and so forth. And then we see, okay, we've got this nice research. Let's see if we can move these programs out into the community. And those are the transportability pilots. And so I'm going to go to this next slide, which is a little busy, and I hope you can read. But these are the MST adaptations and the phases of where they are in being researched and where they are in being transported into the real world. And so you see on top is MST with serious juvenile offenders, and that has, you know, because that's been going on for 30 years, we've progressed to the point where mature transport second generation means that it's been transported by people that I've trained, who then have trained other people, and third generation is folks who have then trained other people, so it's very, very, very far removed. I've become essentially the great-great-great-grandfather of the program. You know, on the other hand, you have, let's go down to Blue Sky, which is a very kind of complicated program where we spent 4 years, about 4 years, doing the adaptation work, writing the manuals, doing pilot work, and the effectiveness trial just started last month, 5 years down the road. You know, as another example, MST psychiatric problems, MST psychiatric, we've done the efficacy work, we've done effectiveness trials in Hawaii and in Nebraska. But we're still at the pilot transport phase. Denmark and Netherlands are looking at MST psychiatric programs. We have a number of them going on in New York City. But we have not really quite nailed down the protocols like we would want them to be. And so when folks say, oh, gee, I have a great idea for what you could do, what we could use MST for, we kind of refer them to this process that we go through. And it's complicated. It is cumbersome, but I think the notion is that whatever you develop, you want it to be effective. You don't, and you may have to take it slowly and more slowly than folks might want to take it, but I think it's a careful, well-conceived process and kind of what that is all about is this is the slide we looked at yesterday, which is the MST Quality Assurance Program, and there are so many components to the Quality Assurance Program, and if you're going to do a major adaptation, right, these components change. Right? The manuals change, right? The supervision changes, the expert consultation changes. That changes some of the measures and the feedback systems. Right? And so it's a very major adaptations, substantive adaptations are a very kind of complex process, and it kind of all gets back to this issue in this slide, which we showed yesterday, and that is we've established a clear association between fidelity, treatment adherence, and outcomes. And because of that association, tremendous work and emphasis focuses on this issue. And this is that dashboard, where there's a continuous tracking. And the adaptations take a lot more work, more expensive, they are often much more challenging, and eventually we hope most of them will be bearing out, but we've had some adaptations that have just failed and have been left on the wayside. Now, for the Spanish context, I think what's most important is a point I made yesterday as well, and that is that in the initial import of MST programs, they should be the basic MST for serious juvenile offenders. Once those programs, they end up being imported here, once those programs are imported and they have a successful track record, then it becomes time to do adaptation. And so in Europe, it's only within the last year or two, even though we've been here for quite a while, it's only within the last couple of years that adaptations have been brought in, and they've been brought in for treating substance abuse, and for child maltreatment primarily. And so again, all this information, these slides and slides like these, and publications on the transport of a model and outcomes can be seen at these websites and accessed at these websites.
Toda la información en estas páginas web son gratis.
Gracias.